This week on the Documentary Review Podcast, Jonathan and I try to figure out what this documentary is really trying to say as we look at the 2012 documentary Room 237. Welcome to the podcast. I am PT.
And I'm Jonathan. Glad you can join us.
As always, indeed. How's it going, Jonathan?
Going good. Going good. Life's good. Just as a FYI to all our listeners, this podcast is actually a fake podcast that's been done previously by Stanley Kubrick, and is now, just a forgery of the real thing. So
yes, this is actually my veiled confession that I am Stanley Kubrick.
There you go. It's not actually dead. It's just hosting a podcast.
Good times. So, well, I guess go ahead and give your synopsis first, if you don't mind.
Okay, I don't, but this is a tough synopsis to give. Room 237 basically takes us through several really in-depth viewpoints about the movie The Shining, based on the book by Stephen King, directed by Stanley Kubrick, and what they believe the real message of the film was, above and beyond the obvious plot and storyline, but what Stanley Kubrick meant by the film and the underlying messages that he portrayed. And it kind of really dives into, if you're really watching this documentary, kind of dives into belief, what people can believe in and come up with once you look at something hard enough and long enough, and where that kind of takes you in your mind, or at least that's what it was to me.
Ooh, nice. I like it. So did you like this documentary?
I kind of did. It was, which is kind of weird. It was one where, like, right away, or like right when I kind of started off, I was like, I'm gonna hate this thing because it is like, I'm not a conspiracy theory guy. I'm not like and most of the time that really drives me crazy when you see a lot of people diving into that. But the way it was filmed and the way it was just like a presentation of, they never show the faces of these people. You're just hearing like their thoughts and ideas on the film, and it certainly didn't convince me in any way about anything these people had to say, but I was kind of intrigued by kind of where their minds had taken them into this world. Anyway, that's a really long answer to I don't think I liked it. You?
Nice. Yeah, I liked it a lot. I kind of thought you would hate it. So I'm slightly bummed that you didn't hate it, but it was good. I mean, I'm glad for you that you didn't hate
it. Right. That would be more
interesting discussion. But I think there's still a lot of interesting stuff to say. First of all, like, what's your thoughts on The Shining overall as like a movie and a book and all that stuff? Are you a fan?
Well, not that big of a fan because I've never read the book actually, which I kind of like. And it's funny because I've seen The Shining maybe like twice, maybe 2 or 3 times now over the last many years. I liked it. I thought it, it was, but I wasn't like a huge fan of it. I was like, oh, it's pretty creepy and, all that good stuff. I've been to the Stanley Hotel several times in Estes Park. I like that place.
Nice.
Yeah, it's actually really cool. And they have an awesome Halloween party in case anyone out there wants to go do something this Halloween. Sorry, totally lost my train of thought there.
No, it's all good. Yeah, I like it a lot. That was the first, I think it was the first Blu-ray I bought when I got a Blu-ray player.
Really?
So I was like, I think this would be good on Blu-ray. And I like the book a lot too and everything. But my history with this movie or this documentary is that I read one of my favorite, like, I don't even know what you call him. Like, he's kind of just like a pop culture writer. Like, his name's Chuck Klosterman. He writes these crazy books that are like it's interesting that he wrote about this because he almost does like what these people do, except in a more like sane way. Like, he takes a really deep dive into like he has like a really great essay on Saved by the Bell. And it's like deep dive into Saved by the Bell. Like, why do people like Saved by the Bell? Like, why was that like a big thing for like
Yeah,
our kind of generation, we were young. Like, what does it say about us that we like that? And like, let's look really closely at that. And so he takes these really dumb things and like takes the really deep dives into them. He has, but anyway, he's a really interesting writer. And so I first heard about this movie when he wrote about it, and like he saw it at some film festival, and I didn't get to see it for like 2 years, but I was so intrigued by the idea of this documentary from when he wrote about it that I was super excited to finally see it when it came on Netflix. Yeah, and I definitely liked it a lot. Yeah, so let's talk about the whole thing kind of that you said about. So I think that's one really interesting point, that they don't show the people at all. It's all clips from movies. Like everything they show in the documentary is clips from different movies.
Yeah, it's virtually all from Kubrick films.
Yeah, a lot of it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a couple things that aren't. I wish there weren't, actually. I wish they had, like, because there's just these very, very few instances where they show things other than from Kubrick films, and I wish they hadn't done that. I was like, oh, it would have been just a little cooler if they would have done nothing but footage, maybe images of like on stuff on set and then from actual films themselves. But
yeah,
anyway.
So what do you think about the you said you liked the choice to not show the people at all or anything, and I did too. Let's get into the mindset of the people here. Why do you think they made that decision, or what do you think they were trying to do by making that decision?
Well, I mean, I liked it because it kind of breathed almost a little more life into the theories themselves, that these were detached from the people that were making them. And it was just, it made it more of just like you were almost interviewing ideas. And that's kind of what you were doing, because you didn't care about these people, other than, I mean, like not in a bad way, but like, I mean, like the point was to care about what their views and opinions and thoughts on the stock, or, of The Shining were. You didn't care what their background was, or if they were, what they did in the rest of their lives, or brought them to those points, or their stories. And they might have been all been interesting, but that just wasn't. So it was like, well, if you just really, really want to make that the case, just because I mean, it made it a little hard to follow who was who, because you only knew their voices. You never had any, visual attachment, any images to attach to these people. But I liked that, and I thought it just kept it on that whole plane of, this is all just people overthinking things, and it just worked for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it is interesting too. Sometimes, like, there's a few times that I wasn't sure like who the person was who had like who were, because I also like too the way it wasn't like this dude's theory and then this person presented their theory. It was they gave little pieces of chunks of this person and that person, but it was definitely interweaving between different people. So it's sometimes I wasn't sure exactly whose theory this little piece was and stuff like that, and that added to like the trippiness of it and stuff like that. I think
it did. Yeah, it definitely did. And I like that too. And then I like the fact that like even the theorists or whatever, just kind of like this general overthinking of watching a film. I mean, that not that there aren't some deep things, especially when it's Kubrick, and yeah, he puts a lot of thought into his, what's in the frames of his film, so you can really analyze them. But like I mean, like one guy's kind of thing is like, oh yeah, it's all about like basically the annihilation of the American Indian, and like the European movement across what's now the United States and everything like that. But then he'd still get caught up every once in a while. I'm like, yeah, and then like well, this door was open before, but it was shut. What does that mean? It's like, I don't know, probably nothing, but sure, whatever. Good observation, I guess, for watching a film way too many times.
Right. I like too, like the save lives that we don't, and you kind of touched on this, but that we don't know anything. Like we don't know if these people are living in their parents' basement or if they're like super respected film critics. We don't know anything, and I did look up a little bit afterwards on one of the guys, and I think it was the Holocaust guy, the guy with the Holocaust theory. Is like a pretty respected like New York Times writer, but most of them, are just people who like post crazy theories on YouTube. But I did like that too, that we didn't that it puts all those different people on the same level, and we're just judging them by their ideas,
right?
As crazy as they may be. So let me ask you this, because one thing that actually did really surprise me after I read that Chuck Klosterman article and then saw it a couple years later was he was very much of the opinion of like, obviously none of these theories are probably true, but he was like, there's two of the theories that like that are like at least a little bit more logical than the others. Um, and I kind of felt the same way, but it was very different too than the ones he identified. So I'm curious if you were there any that you were like, well, this at least has potentially some merit or whatever.
Um, well, there was one I thought that I certainly wouldn't say it has any merit, but I would say the one that has the Apollo 11 people. I thought that that was really cute that they pointed out that the kid's wearing an Apollo 11 shirt in the one scene. Danny
Right.
is, and I mean, like, I assume that that was Kubrick's kind of joke because obviously he did not fake the moon landing,
Right.
so that was kind of like a laugh to the guy who was conspiracy theory was that Kubrick faked the moon landing.
Right.
The only one that I thought had like was interesting to me was the woman who kind of did like a cool like mapping out of the actual like a blueprint, if you will, of the building of the Stanley Hotel, in relation to where it was in the movie, and showed like there was impossible windows and kind of tried to map out where everything happened, which again just seems like kind of a cool thing to do. But obviously, like, I'm sure the reality of that was when you're filming in especially on a live set or like a live location, not a sound stage, that you have to make do with the actual space of the area, which doesn't coincide with what you want it to be on script. So you shoot from different angles and make different things. So yeah, I guess there's no merit whatsoever to any of the theories.
Nice. So the two that I was like, well, these have some merit is the one about the Minotaur and the maze or whatever. Just because I mean, there is a maze in the movie, and Minotaur is like, a big thing having to do with mazes. So I wouldn't be surprised if he like threw in some Minotaur imagery on purpose. Some of them were like specific examples I didn't didn't buy, but like
Yeah.
but some of them I was like, well, he probably could have. There are a lot of stuff about mazes in this, so I wouldn't be surprised if they threw in a couple Minotaur stuff. And then the other one that I liked a lot and could see some merit to, although not to the lengths they went, was the whole like thing that if you play it forwards and backwards at the same time. Um, like now I don't believe that they like purposely like put the images on top of each other to like make them all line up or whatever, because damn, it's hard enough to make a movie without doing that. But like even in like my own writing books and stuff, I definitely do think about that. Like I want the first scene to mirror the last scene, and I think about like, what's the second scene, the second to last scene, and try to like build it as a little bit of a mirror, just like thematically, because thematically that feels better or whatever um, than doing it the other way. So I could see a little bit of that structurally being having some merit to it. And plus I just thought it was really cool when they showed the images overlaid over each other. I was like, man, I want to try that with some other movies just for fun to see that.
Right,
See the
right.
cool stuff.
See, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I think that to say, that's where all the people that were interviewed or whatever missed it. Is there are things like that in reality where, like, yes, you know, does that make sense stylistically? Was Stanley Kubrick a great filmmaker who probably thought of things like that? Because that was his craft, his trade, and he was an experienced director at that point. So yeah, did he probably think of having mirrored imagery or whatever, if you will, to the scope of the film while he's like writing the script and you're adapting the script and directing the film? Yes, probably he did that. Did he intend for someone to play it forward and backwards, overlaying images at the same time so he could come up with some cool stuff that happened during that process? No, I'm going to give 100% for sure. No, he did not do that. But that's where they kind of took it. That's where, and again, it was that was something that really, like, I found really interesting for all these people, was that, like, the amount of, like, I don't know if you call it faith or what, that you can like begin to develop if you just think about something too much. Like you can start to become lost in it. And like I thought one really really interesting line to me was that I think it was the guy that did the Native American underlay that was like his theory. He was like, at one point he's like, well, it doesn't, the intent of the artist doesn't necessarily mean, make the meaning of the piece. So he was basically saying like, well, I'm pretty much right. Stanley Kubrick might not have known he was doing this, but he did it. He did it. And I figured out that he did it. And,
Right.
but, and that was basically like at the end, you can't argue with that. I mean, you got to be like, well, yeah, I mean, you could interview Stanley Kubrick, who said, I have no idea what you're talking about. No, it wasn't about Native American, genocide at all. But this guy would be like, well, it is. You're just wrong, even though
Right.
you're the creator and developer of this. But
So how do you feel about that? So I mean, that's like a real school of criticism, I think, is for people to say that. How do you feel about that whole idea of that the artist's intent is not necessarily?
I totally agree with that to a certain extent. Where I mean, if I draw a picture or paint a painting, which you wouldn't get much emotional out of it because I'm not a painter. But if I was and you looked at it and you said that painting makes me sad, it's a sad painting to me, and I said, well, it's supposed to be happy. Well, there you go. I mean, that right there is the basic kind of proof that the artist's intent isn't necessarily your take on the piece. I think it's a little different when you're talking about something like a film. Yeah, I mean, like I guess it's always there, and I mean that's this guy's point. Can you argue about the way it makes people feel, and everyone? Hopefully, if it's good art, it'll be a little different for everyone. So you can't really say the artist's intent makes the piece or makes it correct. But if somebody were to tell you that The Shining is about coal mining, I think you can say no, you're wrong. It's not. There's no coal miners in it. There's no. And I mean, some of these theories are close to that, where you
Right.
could say,
Well, I have a very not nearly this in depth, but a very personal experience with this very thing, which is that I've had two separate people email me about this book I wrote, Regulation 19, which is about kind of about this like kind of evil guy takes over this town and puts in all these laws and stuff like that. I've had two separate people email me and be like, well, it's just awesome like to see like a libertarian like yourself like write this book, and like clearly I love the way you painted Obama as Zed, the bad guy in your book or whatever. Like clearly that's it's so great to like just see such a great analogy put together or whatever. Two separate people have got that out of it. And as you know from this podcast, my feelings are definitely a little more liberal than that. That was definitely not my intent. But at the same time, I'm like, well, I guess if that's what they get out of it.
okay,
I'm not
well,
going to say that if you want to see that as that, then okay, I guess.
huh. Well, two things. One, where can I get a copy of this book? Because it sounds intriguing.
pthilton.com.
Okay. Well, at pthilton.com, I'll be sure to purchase a copy of Regulation 19 sometime after the
Nice.
podcast. No problem. And secondly, I mean, so I'm an artist. So it didn't bother you? I mean, like the fact that someone misinterpreted your work so much. I
No, I
mean, I
don't think.
guess,
I think I was felt a little flattered by it. Like I was just more like, well, it's cool that they like that they like felt like a connection to it, and like it made them like yeah, I don't know.
yeah,
It's cool that there's more, that there's like a depth to it that they saw that it's not something that I put into it. So they kind of brought themselves to the work and weren't just like, okay, that was a cool story. They really thought about it, and I guess I like that aspect of it.
right. You know what else? I think like now that that story really kind of put the pieces together a little bit more for me. Like I was saying about how people can dive into something so deeply that they, I don't know, lose touch in a way where, so these people were obviously both, that interpreted your book that way, I assume were very strongly, had very strong political viewpoints in the
Yeah.
way that they thought, your book reflected.
Right. The one guy's Twitter handle was like Tea Party Joe or something, something like
Right. Right. And now if we look at this, if we break it down too, so one guy thought that The Shining was basically about World War II / the Nazi Germany, genocide of the Jews. But he also studied heavily, and I can't remember, he'd read several books about it. I think he was like mentioned something like he was a history teacher about that. The guy that thought it was about the genocide of the American Indians, was also a student of that. In fact, he was like, I studied it deeply. He lived in various areas where he'd grown up around it, and I was obviously, it was something that he was really into. Then the one person, and then there was one person that thought it was saying, essentially Kubrick's confession about staging the moon landing, who I'm sure that guy was a great, he was like, I have already proven that the moon landing was fake.
Right.
So, I mean, like, he obviously had spent a lot of time thinking about the moon landing. That was like his world. So all these people, if you apparently dive so deeply into one topic, you can start to see that topic in everything around you, including The Shining. At least that's, or books or whatever. I don't know what that means for the human psyche, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really cool things about art is that, it's deeper. It's deeper than just some pictures on a screen or whatever. People bring themselves to it and they interact with it, and each person takes something a little different out of it, even if it's something kind of crazy. That's what's cool about art, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm a huge advocate of as movies as art. For that very reason, I think everyone can interpret it differently, and it can obviously invoke emotion and all kinds of great things. But kind of off topic.
I think a lot of the stuff that they, in my personal opinion, at least, a lot of the stuff that they point out is interesting little things, has a much easier explanation, and I do think that it's possible. Like, for instance, the map stuff that one lady was talking about. I think it's possible that Kubrick knew about that and did that intentionally. But if he did, I think the much simpler explanation was he was just trying to increase the weirdness, the way this hotel seemed weird, and a lot of the things that they point out, I think have, if you look at them from the story perspective, have kind of served the story. I don't think there's a need to go and see a crazy hidden story behind it or whatever.
Right. I agree too with especially when they want to, again, and this is the kind of thing where I think Kubrick is a great director and a really intelligent guy. He adds this labyrinth to it. They point out Danny's bike trips around the hotel are kind of very unusual and unique, and they make it harder to almost feel your way around the hotel than easier. If he did intentionally make that window seem like it was like an impossible window in the midst of the hotel, all those things would be great things for someone that was trying to make an undertone of a labyrinth, of a maze, of something you get lost inside of, both mentally and physically. Those are great things, and I think that adds depth to a movie in a way that was the real intent of the movie.
Right. Yeah, and I just keep coming back to, man, it's damn hard to make a movie without putting it all the I'm gonna be not only am I gonna work for a year to make this movie and make it as beautiful and awesome as I can, but I'm also gonna put this hidden crazy meaning in it. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, but and again, if you start to dive into conspiracy theory, there's always the hyper competence and hyper intelligence that have to come along with it. And I think very much that you're totally in the right, that in reality, that stuff's freaking impossible to begin with. It's just when people, a great little conspiracy that I love out here in Colorado is Denver International Airport, which is kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Has this, there's a bunch of theories about this giant city that's built underneath the airport. So it's like a huge city that exists underneath the IA, and there's a lot of people that believe that. There's a lot of theories about it. But I mean, one thing that it's so hard for any government project to be completed on time or under budget, or even way over budget and way over time. It's still really difficult to build a massive underground city. It would be one of the greatest engineering feats of modern man. Two, it would take hundreds of thousands of people to build said city that would also have to not mention it to anyone they've ever met. And I mean, it's just one thing where you're just wow, I mean, it's so hard for us to function, just do the basics. To make an airport is really hard. It was really difficult. It took us a lot of time and a lot of money, and we screwed it up. We blew $1 billion on a baggage system that didn't work, and that's just trying to get the basics done. To build this whole subsidy, which is way more complicated and way more impossible. Like, I don't understand how you can just jump on board and be like, yeah, it sounds reasonable.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think of the one interesting thing? And I don't know if this was just kind of the director of the documentaries cherry picking different parts of their theories, but it was interesting to me that they all seem to like focus on similar parts, like the whole like the whole like part where like he's being interviewed in the office by that dude or whatever. That seemed like the few theories like had big things on that part of it. And then again, when they're like carrying their baggage, that seemed to be a big thing that a number of different people focused in on. It was interesting to me that their wild theories all seem to focus on similar parts of the movie, at least what we saw of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I would be like, I would like to see if that, because I mean, obviously, they've looked through the movie in ways that you would never think of. Like, a lot of them were like, all right, now if you watch this next part frame by frame,
Right.
you'll notice, and it's like, whoa. Uh, Apparently, everyone in there, I'm guessing, has watched this movie frame by frame.
Right.
So I don't know. Maybe they just like, yeah, because they never really like. There are tons of like relatively big parts of the movie that just brushed over.
Yeah. Well, one part that cracked me up was that the lady when she was like, oh yeah, my one night like my son came out and he like told me the story that he just made up, and it was like about someone got their head cracked open and there's like a little voice inside that was like talking high pitched, just like the voice in The Shining. And I was like, yeah, maybe that's because he goes to sleep every night listening to, to the sounds of you listening to the watching The Shining frame by frame.
It could be. Yeah.
Um, I was gonna say, oh, I know what I was gonna say. It's interesting too that this whole thing of like I'm sure these people have always existed, right? These people who I guess not always, but like through the era of movies, there's probably been people like this at least for as long as we've been able to watch them, slow them down, as long as there's been like VCRs and stuff like that. But I feel like this is kind of definitely a product of the internet age of like, in the past, like in the 80s, if I had my VCR and I would have watched it, The Shining, a million times and come up with some crazy theory, I would like tell you and my wife, and you guys would be like, well, that's kind of weird. And then that would be that. But in this modern world we live in, each of these guys can have a YouTube channel and put out crazy video essays breaking it down frame by frame and stuff like that. Which I think is kind of a fun and crazy aspect of the world today.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I guess so. Does it bring out more crazy in the world, or does that change anything?
I don't know.
Because I mean, because like you said, yeah, if like yeah, if in 1986 when we all had home VCRs, I think we had them by then. You would have, yeah, you would have brought this theory to, yeah, like you said, a couple of people's attention. We would have been like, how many times have you watched The Shining? That's weird, dude. It's really weird. And you would have been like, oh, sorry, that would have been it. Worse, if you would have taken it to the extreme, you could have possibly, sent in an article to some magazine somewhere,
Right.
Who promptly would have rejected it. And yeah, but now I guess you can just, because it just feeds you too. Because like, I mean, like if I'm sure all these people that have written these theories, especially like Moon Landing guy,
Right.
like obviously he gets a ton of messages from people all the time. They're like, dude, give it up.
Right.
It's
But
obviously.
he also probably gets messages from people that are like, "Oh my god, dude, you've opened my eyes, and that's awesome," or whatever. And then
I'm sure he does. But I'm sure both fuel him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Like,
and I think that's cool. I mean, it's crazy or whatever, but it's a harmless kind of crazy.
Yeah, I guess so.
And at least instead of like, imagine like back in the 80s, if I had that moon landing theory and I was like, holy shit, I've cracked the case, and like there's no way for me to get the word out on that. Like you said, maybe I write some letters to the newspapers and they ignore them, and I'm like, oh my god, I've got this crazy information that's like impossible for me to get this out in the world. It would just drive me crazy. But now at least they can post their videos and be like, hey, look, I got a few people who believe me or whatever.
Yeah, but the only danger side of that is like, which this is a little off topic. The danger side of that is, so if you would have like written like, oh my gosh, written a letter to the New York Times, I have figured out that the space landing was total bunk. Like here is my like rock solid proof, and maybe a journalist would have picked that up and been like, wow, I wonder if this guy has anything, you know, would have read through your stuff. And even if you read through your stuff and was like, wow, there's some good points, you probably would have done some investigative reporting, made a couple phone calls, talked to a couple physicists and been like, oh, yeah, we did land on the moon. Okay, well, this is ridiculous. And then we would have thrown that story out. Instead, that story now is just instantly information. And all of a sudden you get like people that, you know, stumble across it and they read it and you're like, oh, those are some convincing facts. All right, I'm sure. I don't think much about the space landing anyway. It's fake. Moving on. And then all of a sudden, like, you get this, like, I mean, now there's like a, I don't know, subculture out there that thinks that the moon landing was faked. But
I guess that's not good.
That's probably not good.
Yeah. Man, a good companion documentary to this, and I've been wanting to recommend this documentary, but it's not available for streaming that I could find. Shoot, and I can't remember what it's called now, but it's about this guy who he had this big theory that the 2001: A Space Odyssey was like this religious thing about how people from Jupiter were going to come and like and like basically after we die we go on the spaceship and go to Jupiter, I think is what the deal was. And like but this was like in the 80s he had this, and it was basically that situation where he was just writing letters to all kinds of newspapers. He was on some like a bunch of like call-in radio shows where, you know, they could just call in and say your opinion and they let him go for a couple minutes and cut him off or whatever. But the documentary was about him, and he started doing these they call them Toynbee tiles, and I'm pretty sure there's one in Denver. But he did them all over the world. Like there's in all these major cities all over the world, he would go like embed this like tile in the pavement that said like, it was this crazy, completely crazy thing about 2001: A Space Odyssey, Jupiter dead. It wasn't even like full sentences. It was like this, this crazy like theory on this thing. And for a long time, no one could figure out like who did it and like even how they did it. Cause it was like embedded in the pavement in this weird way that was, no one knew exactly how they could do it overnight. Just really fascinating documentary. If you ever get the chance.
I wish I knew the title. I'm totally curious now.
All right, I'll look it up while we're talking.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess that's if you have a crazy theory that you really believe back then, you just go and you've been sidewalks. Yeah. But it was cool in the documentary too, because they were talking about like they interviewed a bunch of like people who worked at newspapers and stuff. They were like, yeah, he would write us like every week about this stupid thing. Toynbee tiles. Here we go. Documentary. All right, hold on. I got it. Resurrect Dead. That's what it's called. Resurrect
Dead. Ooh.
That's one of the things on the. Here's what the Toynbee tiles said. Toynbee idea. Hidden 2001 resurrect dead on planet Jupiter. That's what his tile says. That's all over the place.
That's all it says?
Yes.
Oh man, I'm a little let down. I thought there'd be more clues. There's craziness in it than that, and that's pretty crazy. But
but it'd be like you imagine you walk outside your house tomorrow morning, and that's just like embedded in the pavement, like in the road. Super weird. They'd like that's pretty weird. How'd they get there?
Yeah, that I kind of like actually. Like I guess I kind of like that when they did with the whole street art thing too.
All right.
People just go around and like. I mean, like his is a little more like creepy and menacing, I guess. But like, I love the idea of like figuring out a way to do some crazy piece of art for no reason at all in the sake of art.
Yeah.
You know, putting way too much time into it.
I like the one line that hit home in this documentary for me was the guy was there. I can't remember the context of why they were talking about this, but the one guy was saying like, you know, one theory of why we dream is that to just kind of like interpret everything that we've seen in our life and then add into that what we've seen that day and like try to interpret it in a new way. And that Kubrick's films are kind of like that. They're a way for us to interpret the world. So it definitely kind of supports what you were saying about that we just bring ourselves to it and take our own meaning from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, and I think that's, you know, apparently there's a lot of, you know, there's a couple of examples in this film. You brought 2 examples to the light off the cuff, but I mean, apparently there's a lot of examples of that. If you just focus on something enough, you see it in everything. Yeah. But that, again, another like the one that I was like, oh, there's a little creepiness too. Like all these guys in the theories and like they're spending way too much time on The Shining. I thought that was like innocent, you know what I mean? Like, right. Yeah, if somebody wants to dedicate way too much time to watching The Shining and trying to figure it out, that's a hobby. You know, it's a weird hobby, but more power to you. You know, But then the one guy that was like, yeah, you know, art imitating life kind of thing. Like, I have a young child. You know, there's a young child in The Shining. My was like, we're thinking about moving out to some remote place and like all this stuff. And I was like, The Shining didn't make your life the way it is, dude. You gotta like stop watching that movie, dude. You gotta just like lay off. He's like, yeah, I don't have a job. He didn't have a job. I was like, dude, do not get a typewriter and sit alone, okay? We all know how that ends. It's not good. Just get a job.
He tried to kill his family. I tried to kill my family.
Right. That's like the next step of that little story. Dude, change movies at least. Watch Good Will Hunting. Maybe you'll really cherish the love of your wife and, you know, move to California or something. I don't know. But
right. So Stephen King, Stephen King did hate the movie The Shining, but the real reason he hated it was because he didn't like the way that it portrayed Wendy, the wife. He thought, like in the book, she's kind of like a tough character and like definitely holds her own. In the movie, she's kind of like just a milquetoast or whatever who lets him walk all over her. So that's the real reason he didn't like the movie.
Interesting.
And he said they said that he said that he watched this documentary like the first half of it and that he couldn't take it anymore because their theories were so crazy it was driving him nuts and he had to turn it off.
Yeah, I could see that. I could totally see that. Like if that's honestly like if you would have told me exactly what this was about prior to watching it, I probably wouldn't have watched it, and I would have guessed that I would have had a hard time sitting through it. But you know, the other odd thing about it was I did watch the documentary by myself at night while everyone else in the house was asleep, and I totally started getting creeped out by like just watching like images from The Shining like constantly, right. And like hearing all these crazy people talk about The Shining, and like plus they have like a nutty surround sound system. So like all of a sudden I'd hear like when that guy's kid, one of the people being interviewed, his kid starts like crying in the other room, which is really cute because they just let it roll while he goes and calms the kids down and comes back. When that kid started like crying in the other room, like first I thought somebody was in my house because like the surround sound like it's coming from like behind me and off to the right or whatever. I was like, oh man, what the hell? So I was like totally creeped me out, and like afterwards I was like, I really want to watch The Shining. Nice. This documentary definitely wanted me to go back and watch The Shining and other Kubrick films.
Yeah, me too. That I'll definitely be watching it again soon. One more Stephen King thing is that, you know, he recently wrote the sequel to The Shining, which is about Danny as a grown up, and it's a pretty interesting book because it doesn't really like mention the actual events of The Shining hardly at all. It talks about like shortly after The Shining and stuff like that, but they hardly like even refer back to it very much. But there's one line that totally stuck with me from the book, and I think this is kind of like the one line that directly addresses The Shining, and it kind of says what Stephen King was trying to say with The Shining, I think. And the line is he's thinking back on that time and thinking about his dad, and he's the line is his dad had been a scary man, and how that little boy had loved him. So I think that's kind of what Stephen King was going for, was the whole idea of like the the abusive father, and like the child loves their father no matter what, and that kind of thing.
Cool. That's a cool inspiration for a book. And then, you know, and the good old Stephen King take on it.
Yeah. And I think Stephen King was working through his own alcoholism a bit in that as well. Cool. I think that's all my notes. Do you have anything else on this bad boy?
No, I think that's a pretty good recap of diving into Room 237.
Cool. All right. How many stars are you going to give this crazy movie?
I'm going to give it 3.5.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm going to go 4.5, I think.
Wow. I guess so.
Yeah. All right. Next time on, I'm gonna switch it up a little bit. We're gonna go a little bit off of our norm here. I'm gonna toss you out because, you know, documentaries aren't only the world of movies isn't the only place documentaries happen. Documentaries happen on TV as well. So I'm gonna toss you out 3 TV documentaries, and I propose that we watch the first 2 episodes of one of these shows, since they're 45 minutes each, but it'll be an hour and a half, so be about the same as a documentary.
All right.
So here's my 3 choices. First one is Inside Man, and this is starring Morgan Spurlock, the guy from Super Size Me.
Yeah.
And each week he goes and like works in a different industry. I think the first two are like the legal marijuana industry, and the like a gun industry are the first two, I believe. And kind of he works in the industry, and then it's all about the politics around that particular issue and things like that.
Okay.
Number 2, Chef's Table. I'm trying to think of a sexy way to spin this because it sounds really lame, but I watched the first episode and it was way better than it sounds. This like each episode of this like basically tells the story of one of the world's like greatest chefs, and like tells their story of how they became like a great chef. And it did not sound that interesting to me, but I watched the first episode and I was like, holy shit, that guy's been on a journey to become one of the world's greatest chef. So there's that. And then finally, this one's got a little connection to us here. One of the most popular podcasts in the world is This American Life, and they made a TV show version of it. So if you're not familiar with the podcast or radio show, they kind of take like a theme each week and then tell like 3 or 4 different stories on that theme from like regular people telling stories about that idea. One of my favorites is they talk about the idea of how like you miss things, like there's certain things that you just for some reason don't learn, and it's weird. Like the one of my favorite examples, this one lady who's like at a party in her mid-20s, and for some reason they're talking about unicorns, and she's like, yeah, so when did unicorns go extinct anyway? And like is like totally smart, like college educated, smart person, but for some reason she just never caught the idea that unicorns are a mythical creature. So that was a great episode. There's all kinds of stuff like that. So that's the flavor of This American Life. So anyway, those are our choices: Inside Man, Chef's Table, or This American Life.
I'm gonna skip Inside Man, even though I like Adam Sporlock, but especially if it covers marijuana industry, because we already did that once. At least in one of the first episodes. Let's see. I'm a little curious about Chef's Table. I have a friend that is big into like he almost only eats in restaurants that he knows the chef, like which chef is working at that restaurant, and like respects their culinary taste. So he's like kind of turned me into a little bit more of a food snob. Well, I was certainly like had zero food concerns before knowing him, so certainly changed my view on food.
Nice.
And that might be interesting.
Cool.
Let's see. And yeah, let's do that. Let's do Chef's Table.
All right.
Just check it out. Everybody eats. It's a topic we can all relate to.
We'll food snap it up. It'll be great.
All right.
So Chef's Table is on Netflix. You can watch the first 2 episodes and report back next week.
Okay. Cool.
Till then, this is PT. Keep it real.
And this is Jonathan. We'll see you next week.